Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us. I'm Amelia Moran, the Youth Media Ambassador for New South Wales, and today I'm going to be joined by a former 4th Stafffield Scout and filmmaker, Mr. Michael Dillion AM. Today, he's going to tell us all about his scouting journey and how it has led him to where he is today in his career as a successful filmmaker, and tell us all about his most recent film, The Great White Whale. Good evening, Michael, and thank you for taking your time to talk to us. How are you today?
Thank you, Amelia.
Would you be able to tell us where it all began? Could you maybe tell us a little bit about your scouting background?
Well, I started Scouts a little bit later than most people, about 13. And of course, as soon as I did, I got an instant new set of friends, which is one of the benefits of being a Scout. And I started going camping, and unfortunately, all my camps coincided with huge rain events. So we'd have these streams of water flowing through the tents. And when I tried to make my first damper, a huge storm came halfway through and my damper floated away. But anyway, it was looking back at it, it was great. And even at the time, it was good.
I'm sure you have a lot of very fond memories of your time as a scout, but what's the most memorable thing or your favorite thing that you experienced?
Mm. Well, we went, luckily, I coincided with a Australian jamboree. So I got to meet people from overseas wearing, even from New Zealand, wearing exotic New Zealand scarves. And it's got to trigger something in me that I really wanted to go and actually go to these countries and see these things for myself. And the other thing was I was very lucky when I got into the Venturers, what was then called Senior Scouts, now the Venturers, that I had a very active, charismatic leader who started rock climbing and canyoning and caving as kind of almost formal activities in scouting. And I was in the sort of, he was my troop leader. So I was sort of every weekend we were doing amazing sort of learning how to rock climb or getting these blow up mattresses and going down these big slot canyons in the Blue Mountains. And in fact, we invented something which called bike hiking, which was we'd put our packs on our backs, on our bikes, on our packs on our backs, and then we'd get on our bikes and we'd cycle off and into the Blue Mountains or even into the Snowy Mountains. And these were just fairly, and this going back a long way, this were just very primitive bikes. They weren't mountain bikes. But doing what we're doing, I suppose you could say we invented mountain biking.
I can personally say that I'm very excited for the Shelley Jamboree in Queensland in January, and I'm sure you can justify that it's going to be an amazing experience.
It
Um,
is, yeah.
yeah. When was your first interest in filming? Did you have a mentor and what guidance did they provide?
Well, I started at primary school. They used to, on rainy days, they used to show us some films, and something sparked my interest in. I felt that I couldn't afford a camera, but I actually made my own films the only way I could out of strips of paper. This is one of the films I made called The History of the Earth, where, I just divided up into frames and I built like the equivalent of Lego in those days, a cinema. And I'd show these films. I had a script too. I wrote. My poor old sister had to read out the script, and I'd show them to my parents and dog, and that was the beginning of it. And then many years went by before I actually touched my first actual film camera, and that was because um, Warwick Deacock, who was actually the star of my film, The Great White Whale, which is all about attempts to climb Australia's highest mountain, which we'll get to a bit later. But a few years after that, he was leading a trek in the Himalayas, and I was on it, and he got sick. So he was filming with these sort of cameras, which are in those days the state of the art, very heavy and wind up. You had to wind them up, and he got sick. So I was asked to take over the filming. So that's how I really got going. But obviously, I had intrinsic interest in filming in the first place. And 2 years later, I went back with him to the Himalayas again, and I made my first actual film. So then I was hooked.
Would you be able to tell us briefly about the story of the Great White Whale?
Yes, the Australia has lots of small islands. Some are very well known, like Norfolk Island and Lord Howe Island and the Barrier Reef Islands. But way, way to the west, almost closer to Africa than to Australia, an Australian territory that virtually no one's heard of. And strangely enough, its name is Heard Island. So it is quite southerly, far below Tasmania, and on it is Australia's only volcano, and it's also the highest. It has this same volcano is 500 meters higher than Kosciuszko, so it is Australia's highest mountain, and it was 60 years ago. It was unclimbed. Everest had been climbed, but Australia's highest mountain had yet to be unclimbed. And it's very, very remote and hard to get to. And a team of three did actually try to climb it. And this is part of my film. It's called the Great White Whale, of course, because it looks like one from the sea, but it also has the habit of a great white whale, like of Moby Dick, who tends to be not treat anybody well who tries to sort of get anywhere near it. So these three people on that first attempt died in about 5 different ways. And then, but instead of giving up, they decided to go back and sail back a 4,000 kilometre journey from Sydney on a small boat, 10 of them. The boat had so much stuff on it, they didn't have room for a toilet, through the roughest of seas. And so the rest of my film is the attempt to go back and try and overcome this great white whale of a mountain, Australia's highest peak.
Is there any specific message you're trying to get across in this film?
I think it's perseverance because of course, they tried once and they, instead of giving up, they went back under the worst circumstances. I just described the journey they took and tried again. And this is quite common. I mean, it happens to us all. Even Everest I think it had about 8 attempts to climb it before Eben Hillary and Tenzing Norgay actually got to the summit. So it's part of the life experience that if you attempt anything really worth doing and difficult, then you tend to not being able to do it the first time, and you just go back and try again.
What led you to make this film, especially since the events, as you mentioned, did take place 60 years ago?
It was partly because Warwick Deacock, the one I'd mentioned, he was also had begun the Duke of Edinburgh Award in Australia, which is another thing. I managed to get to do that too. So, and he was the one who led that expedition I've just described to the second attempt to climb on Heard Island, and therefore he was the one I mentioned who got sick a few years after it. So he became kind of my mentor and also became a lifelong friend. And I also met a lot of the other of the 10 men who'd done this sort of very bold attempt to climb Big Ben on Heard Island. And I just felt that as they got older, this remarkable story of this expedition would just die out because no one had actually probably sat down and told it in a film form. So I decided to sit them all down in their armchairs and they told this amazing story of and they got a great sense of humor too, about this great long sea voyage and even the difficulty of landing on Heard Island because it's the surf. There's no safe place to land on it. You've got to sort of battle through the surf. They told these amazing stories and the difficulty of the climb and it was such humor. And then one of these people I was filming actually got up. He was the youngest on the expedition. He was only 22. It had meant so much to him that he'd thought up all these wonderful songs about the expedition too, and poems. So he started to sing these wonderful songs, and I knew that we had something special because music is the most important ingredient in any film. So I made the film because it had such wonderful ingredients. These amazing men with extraordinary stories, their humor, and this music. And so that's why I just felt I just had to go ahead and make the whole film.
Since you were a scout, did your experiences in the movement influence your career as a filmmaker?
Yeah, I think it did because I love the outdoors. The chance that you get when in your scouts to go out into the outdoors is just so good for us, not just physically but mentally as well. And I just so my love of the outdoors started in the Scouts, and then it continued. And I therefore, when I chose a filmmaking career, I decided that I'd really like to spend most of my time outside. I didn't want to do feature films or anything like that. I just wanted to find subjects in the outdoors. So have ended up doing lots of wildlife filming and filming all kinds of wonderful adventures, and um, did a lot of filming with Sir Edmund Hillary, actually, who was the first to climb Everest. And we went up the Ganges in jet boats, and went with Tim Cope, who rode horses across from Mongolia to Europe, and I just had so many experiences, which, in a sense, I guess it's an extension of what I learned in the Scouts in the first place, and had done a few Everest expeditions as well. So yeah, I owe the Scouts a lot because it was that great love of outdoors.
Did your time in scouts teach you any lessons that you're still using today?
Um, I think that the main thing was that it's taught me that the best things well, I guess the two main things Scouts teach you that you don't learn in school, and one of them, of course, is the love of the outdoors, and the other one is service. And I've been involved in various. A friend Surveyor started the Australian Himalayan Foundation, and we did have done a lot of school building and so on in the Himalayas. So yeah, my feeling is that they're the two main things that scouting has given me. This knowing that if you do good to others, you actually do more good to yourself. And also, if you get out into the outdoors, it's you know it's always there. You know that if the world is not just the size of a phone, or it's or a computer screen. There's a whole wonderful world out there.
From the trailer, I can see that you've used footage from the expedition as well as in recent interviews. So, how did you capture the emotion and the spirit of the adventure so well?
Right. Well, when I did sit down to interview these people, they were just this was 60 years ago, and they actually did the trip, and they were in their 80s now when they sat down to talk about it. But their memories were so vivid, and their stories uh, was so present. It was though it had happened yesterday, and so you kind of um, you could have get captured in their spirit, and you feel that you end up after a while, especially in this film. You start to think you're actually on the boat itself, heading down there, and you in and this journey is um, your own journey. So it was just because of their great enthusiasm to tell their story, and the excitement of recounting it.
What was the biggest challenge you faced in the making of this film?
Um, the these the the probably it's a big jigsaw puzzle because films are really the interviews. There's the interview aspect. Well, maybe you there are 12 hours of interviews, and then they shot footage too with that same camera, this little camera. Despite all the hardship of the trip, they used this camera in under the worst of circumstances. So they had about 2 hours of film too. They took slides, and I'd gone to Heard Island myself. So, and they took some film as well later on. So it was like a big jigsaw puzzle. You have all these pieces, and you're trying to work. You have to work out the best way to put them all together to make the best picture. But being like unlike a real jigsaw puzzle when you see a picture, the actual picture of what you're trying to do on the packet of the jigsaw puzzle. With filmmaking, you just uh, use your creativity and to work out exactly how it should all fit together. But it's a very big, long job to do that.
How have audiences reacted to the film so far?
They really like it. And the reason is that it's such a good story. They're such characters, these people too, and the humor. So I think we haven't, it's quite a new film, so we haven't had too many screenings yet. But twice, as soon as it's finished, on two occasions, somebody's got up from the audience and spontaneously and said, "This is the best adventure film they'd ever seen." So, and a lot of parents were taking their kids to see it, and um, they just say how engaged they are too, because it's a, we're talking about a trip that happened 60 years ago, but everybody just sort of gets gripped by the story and really likes it, likes being on. It's kind of as though you are on the expedition yourself, and and laughing at all the jokes and these beautiful songs and wondering if they'll ever make it. Of course, that's the other thing. So it's a real sort of rollicking yarn that people have really taken to. Not so much because I'm a good filmmaker. I'm talking about the jigsaw puzzle analogy. I just had such wonderful ingredients to work with. And Paul Jarman, who is a very well-known children's composer. I'm sure some of you know his work. He got on board too and did some extra music for it. So it just had these wonderful ingredients. So yeah, that's why it's my favorite film.
It feels like in this age of YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram that almost anyone can pick up a camera or their phone and start creating, but there's also the challenge to do it well. So, is there any advice that you would give to a young person who aspires to be a filmmaker like yourself?
Uh, yeah, the main advice is to, and I really regret in my day it was much harder to. These days it's so easy to pick up an iPhone and start videoing, or there are these more normal. The ones I often use these days are these sort of these handy cams that you sometimes see in camera shops, which are more uh, devoted totally because it's got a microphone on top and you get good sound. But the thing is, the main thing is to do it. I think that a lot of you won't be your age forever, and all your friends, and you won't be in scouts, and you will miss if you don't video or use your phones to take video and to hear the voices as well, and it'll in you'll regret it as the years go by. And so that's the best way to start. If you want to be a filmmaker, there are so many people have GoPros and everything. It's the main advice, of course, is just to simply use them. And you make mistakes, and then you the main thing is I try and suggest that every troop should have a kind of video chronicler, so that all these wonderful experiences you have, you've got to make sure they're recorded, and that's a fantastic way of just starting to sort of work out exactly how to do it the best way.
What advice would you give to any young adventurers today?
I think I suppose the simple answer to that one is to do lots of adventures. In fact, I did a lot of filming with Sir Edmund Hillary, who was the first to climb Everest, and he, as a young man, was a pretty sort of shy young man, and somehow his school took him out to a mountain, and he started to love the outdoors too. And so as the years went by, I was filmed him for quite a while. He'd often, when we did simpler expeditions, and there'd be other mountaineers or so on with him, the kids their children would often come along too, and because he was passionate about the fact that everybody should be out there adventuring and being out in the outdoors. So his advice to everybody was simply, it doesn't matter what the size of the adventure is. The most important thing is that you have them. So yeah, that's the thing. The answer to that is an adventure takes all kinds of forms, as you know. Um, so it's just a question of finding out what you're passionate about. Like for
And do
instance,
you
I filmed a, a, a boy who was before the age of 15. He wanted to climb all the highest mountains on every continent on Earth because he found a passion. He loved mountaineering. So I just you've just got to find a kind of passion and go with it.
And do you have any final thoughts to share with the scouts of today?
I think simply that it's the two main lessons from scouting basically are that get out into the outdoors and use the outdoors in the most creative way, or the way that suits you best. And the other thing is, of course, the service aspect. That it's you'll find that the more you, as we sort of taught that in Scouts, that the more you think of others, the less you think of yourself, and it's good for you as well as the others if you start thinking about how you can help people.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to come and do this interview. And I'm sure that everyone who's watching is extremely grateful. And I'd like to thank everyone who is watching for watching. So thank you so
Thank you,
much.
thank you all for watching.